October-November 2015, variant 2. Question 1, the diagram shows the PPC for a successful transition economy that moves from point X to point Y. So basically more private sector output and less public sector output. During the transition process, the population of the country expressed a strong preference for increased privatization. What happens to economic efficiency as a result of the transition from point X to point Y? Now, productive efficiency should definitely increase because, well, when you go towards your private sector, the idea is because they have the profit motive, they have incentive, there'll be more competition and so on. They're going to they're obviously going to try to cut costs, right? So because of that, you are going to move closer to the idea of productive efficiency, and your allocative efficiency should also increase. The reason being, again, because now there is some level of public sector output, which means that the government is still there to do stuff like public goods, regulate, demerit, merit, regulate monopolies. All of that is still fine. That's all there. That's not changing. The government is still there. We're not saying we've gotten rid of the government altogether. But the idea here is because now you have there privatization has happened to some extent. You are transitioning towards a more market economy, and because of that, because of competitive pressures, and because, like, well, these firms want to maximize profit and so on, they're probably going to be trying to cut price in order to increase market share. They're probably going to be producing more output because they're more efficient now, so they can produce more output than your public sector. And hence you move a little closer to the idea of P is equals to MC for an individual firm, and you move closer to the idea for within the economy, because now overall it's a better economy to look at now, because your private sector now produces goods and services more efficiently, and hence if you think about the theoretical idea of allocated efficiency for the economy, then no one can be made better off without making anyone else worse off. Resource allocation or redistribution of allocation. So that idea also works then, unless Shahryar wants to add something to this. No? Okay. So question 2. The diagram shows the individual's total utility from consuming glasses of fruit juice. How can this information help derive the individual's demand curve for fruit juice? By revealing the individual's marginal utility curve, by revealing the money value of marginal utility. I don't believe it does reveal the money value. By showing how total utility is maximized, by showing the relationship between utility and expenditure. It doesn't show the relationship between utility and expenditure. So when you want to derive the individual's demand curve, you do, I believe, look at marginal utility. You take marginal utility. You used to take marginal utility upon price. So I think we can conclude with A.
MUX upon P जो है वो that does give the consumer equilibrium वाला point.
Exactly, because when you have this for two different goods, then you have your consumer equilibrium, and through that you used to derive the individual's demand curve. And obviously you can see marginal utility from this particular curve because it's just going to be the gradient of your TU curve. Anyhow, in the diagram, PQ is the consumer's original budget line. So what we have in red, the consumer's income increased from 80 to 120, and at the same time the prices of X and Y change. If the consumer's budget line is now RS, what are the new prices of X and Y? So if we just want to figure out the new prices of X and Y, in fact. So if you look at it like this, let's just take the new budget line, which is this much. If you operate at this particular point on the budget line, which means you're only buying Y, you're buying literally zero quantity of X, you can only buy 12 units of Y. So 12 units of Y you can buy. And what income are you at? You are at 120. So Y should be 10. New price 10, kind of obvious, then it will be B. And you can do the same for X. So at the point S, you'll only be buying X. You'll literally have 0 units of Y. So which means you can buy 20X at your particular new level of income. That is 120. You solve that, you get X is 6. And you're good to go. What will result from the differences in the non-pecuniary advantages of various occupations? So non-pecuniary advantages are more or less your non-wage benefits. If you want to be a little technical about this, they basically mean so benefits or advantages that are not monetary, that can't be in a way quantified. So your bonus is a pecuniary advantage. However, if the firm is giving you a car, or if they're giving you time off, or there are fewer working hours, so that is a non-pecuniary advantage. Anyhow, so what will result from the differences in the non-pecuniary advantages of various occupations? Disequilibrium in the labor market? Not really, because you still have, I mean, overall, like disequilibrium is basically the idea where demand is equals to supply. That's equilibrium. So disequilibrium is basically when these aren't equal. We have no reason to believe why demand wouldn't be equal to supply. They're still demanding labor, people are still supplying labor. Long-term differentials in wage rates. Now, the differential that they've asked is about wage rates, and I believe we can say yes to this, because the idea is, even if in the long run people will switch between various occupations, go towards the occupation that they feel is best for them, and that there will be mobility and so on, theoretically at least. But the idea is, the reason why differentials in wage rates would still exist is because, suppose you switched from, let's say, profession A to profession B. Profession B is paying you less, so profession A was paying you more. But the difference in payment, profession B is making up with non-pecuniary advantages, so non-wage advantages. But if you, so technically speaking, you are in equilibrium, because, well, you're now, both of these professions have like the more or less the same overall benefit of working. But if you look at it only from the perspective of wage rates, you'll be like, oh no, this is a differential here. When in reality, if you look at it more holistically, it really isn't. If you take into account pecuniary advantages, so which is why you can go with B. Monopsony, I don't see how pecuniary advantages give you monopsony. Shouldn't give you shortages of labor in particular occupations. I mean, admittedly, they might switch to the occupations that have pecuniary advantages. That might happen, but the idea is, it still shouldn't give you a shortage, though, because that might give you that might decrease supply overall. Which kind of like looks like this, right? So like, this is demand for labor, this is supply for labor, and this is supply just shifts. You still are at equilibrium. You just have a new equilibrium. That doesn't mean there's a per se a shortage. A shortage would be a point of disequilibrium, which kind of makes A and D look very similar. Which is also a reason why you can cancel out. If two options are like almost the same, you kind of know for sure that they're both wrong, right? Which diagram shows the relationship between AP and MP of labor, given that the quantities of other factor inputs remain constant. So the idea is, MP of labor should be decreasing at some point at least. So it can't go on increasing as you employ more labor. You can cross these two out, because the idea is, if other factor inputs remain the same, you're increasing your variable factor. So diminishing returns set in, and the marginal product should fall at some point. The second thing you need to know is that marginal product cuts the average product curve at its maximum. Clearly, that's not happening in C, so you can cross that out, and you would conclude with D. A firm currently pays its employees an hourly basis, even though the management acknowledges that its employees work to the best of their ability and could not work any harder. The firm decides to switch to a piece rate system of remunerate, whatever this word is, whereby the wage paid to each employee depends on their level of output. So they're basically saying, instead of paying you on an hourly basis, if you produce like 10 units, we'll pay you a particular amount per unit. Why might this new system of whatever this is result in a significant improvement in labor productivity? So why would this increase labor productivity? It would dispense with the need for management to monitor the actions of employees. even if that reduces cost, it does management cost. It doesn't have an effect on labor productivity. It just reduces management cost, even if this happens. It will increase the losses that workers will incur if they are dismissed for not working hard enough. Well, if they're dismissed, they would be pretty bad off. Well, they would lose out here, they'd lose out here as well. Not really that much of a difference. Um, it will lead to the recruitment and retention of more highly talented workers. No, that would happen if you were paying them more, but you're just changing the same system of paying. So that doesn't really work. It strengthens the incentives for workers to increase their earnings. Yes, that would happen because now you have an incentive. You have an incentive to work as quick as you can. To make as much output as you can, because the more output you make, well, the more you'll get paid, and because you have an active incentive rather than just a fixed hourly wage rate, you're likely to improve your productivity, work harder, work faster, whatever. A fashion model is paid 500,000 a year if the next best job he could get as a teacher is 100,000 a year. What are his transfer earnings and his economic rent? So his transfer earnings are the basically is the minimum amount that is needed to keep him in the profession of a fashion model. So that is basically his opportunity cost. So that is 100,000, and his economic rent would be the difference. That's 500 minus 100,000, which gives you 400,000. So you're good. A fourfold increase in all of the firm's inputs results in a threefold increase in its output. So basically, it means that you increased it by a particular percentage, you increased it by 400%, but you only got a 300% increase in output. So it's not proportionate. It's less than proportionate, a less than proportional increase in output. What does this illustrate? Decreasing returns through scale. Yeah, pretty much, because you increased it by this much, your inputs, but you just got this much, your outputs. It wasn't proportional. It wasn't to scale. Obviously, that's not economies of scale, because for that you need increasing returns to scale. It's wait, isn't what's the law of variable proportions?
It is A, because like DMU ही होता है, diminishing returns.
So like are C and D like literally the same thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. But can someone explain why it's not?
Because like they've said that all of the firm's inputs now, if all the inputs increase, there's no input constant, which is the case in diminishing returns and variable proportions के case में ना. So yeah, तभी decreasing returns उसको.
All right. So in diminishing returns, you needed one variable factor to increase, and there was some fixed factor. Is that what you're saying? All right. Okay. Very reassuring. So we're good. A firm employs two factors of production. The table shows the MP of these factors and their respective costs at the current level of output. Okay. Which adjustment in factor use would be most likely to bring the firm nearer to the least cost combination of inputs for its current output level. So if you look at it, you have your marginal products and you have your marginal cost per unit of factor. So you basically, the price of the factor, marginal cost per unit of factor is basically the amount you'd pay for for hiring one additional unit of that factor. So that would be, you had to put marginal product upon the price of the factor and of labor, and that should, well, both are L's. So I don't know what do you call this. Is just land. Let's remember the left hand side is land, and the marginal product upon price of labor. Anyhow, so if you look at land, that is marginal product is 1, this is cost is 4, labor it's 5 upon 3. So clearly this is greater than this, like that's for sure, right? Because 5 upon 3 would give you something more than 1. This gives you 0.25. So as a result, you need to reduce this and increase this. You can increase this by reducing the quantity of this, and the reason being because as you reduce the quantity, the marginal product goes up. So with land, you have less of land, and with labor, to reduce this fraction, you can increase quantity, because if you increase quantity, marginal product goes down, diminishing marginal product. That was the idea, and because of that, the entire fraction goes down, and hence this balances. So you need more of this. Did that explanation make sense?
Yes.
Have they? Sorry.
Firms can grow either externally or internally. What represents internal growth? So basically, externally is mainly by you're looking for mergers and amalgamations and stuff of that sort. Internally is just becoming larger, increasing your market share, by yourself. So finding new export markets, that is internal growth, right?
In yeah, but then maybe not. Let's see the other options. There
Let's
maybe
see the
could
other
be more.
options. Okay, so mergers, no, for sure. So mergers, it has to be no, because that is clearly external growth. Merging with firms in other industries is also no, because that is also external growth, which gives you C. And the reason why you can say yes to finding new export markets is because the firm, it's the same firm, they're just expanding their market share now, even in different markets altogether. They're expanding their market share in different markets by finding export markets, but they're still doing it by themselves. They're still doing it organically internally by just increasing output and so on, and increasing market share. If they start to like merge with any firms from any other industry or the same industry, well, that would not be, that would be external growth. In fact, we've done 10 MCQs, right? So I think that's fine for this video. Let us quickly check our answers. Okay, so we checked our answers, and unfortunately we got one wrong. So that was question 6. It was not D, it in fact was C. And let me first explain why it wasn't D, because the idea here was, if you look at with regards to incentive, now the first issue here was it already told us that the person could not work any harder. So that particular, all the employees were working at their potential, they cannot work any harder. So even if now, if they, if they work harder, they'll increase their earnings, that still would not be a reason for the improvement in labor productivity, because they just can't work any harder. So this would not be a reason why productivity increases, because you would need incentives if the people were slacking off, if they weren't working at their potential, but they are working at their potential. So this would not be an option. The reason why it was C was to think of it like this, to think of it why a highly talented worker would want to come into such a firm. And because understand, if the firm has more highly talented workers, um, if the highly talented worker produces at his or her potential, as compared to a normal worker at producing at their potential, maybe the highly talented worker could produce like 10 units per hour. The normal worker might be able to produce 5 units per hour. They're both working hard. They're both working at their potential, but their potentials themselves, are different anyways. So the highly talented worker would definitely, produce more output. Definitely would have an improvement in labor productivity if this happens. The question then that you still is there is, why would this lead to the recruitment and retention? Now retention is easier to explain, because, well, the highly talented worker would just want to stay with such a firm, right? If you compare two firms, one has, your hourly basis payment, and one has this particular payment on level of output. The highly talented worker can clearly make more units than other work than your normal worker per hour. So why would he or she want to go into a firm which pays him or her an hourly wage, which is going to be the same for all workers, right? Because again, theoretically, they're going to all treat all workers as the same. They're not going to discriminate. Um, so the wage would be the same because they're doing the same work, but the highly talented worker could easily earn more in this particular system, because he or she can just produce more. He can produce more, and hence he or she would have a higher wage, higher money, yeah, would earn more in such a firm. So that explains the idea of retention, and that is kind of similar with recruitment as well, because recruitment is still a two-way street. The firm would obviously want highly talented workers because to increase productivity and so on, but highly talented workers also have to accept the offer, right? They have to throw in their CVs and so on. So because of that, the highly talented workers would obviously be attracted to such a firm, because here is truly where their talents actually benefit them. Otherwise, no matter how good they are, if they're doing the same job as everyone else, they're being paid the same hourly wage rate, so it doesn't really matter to them. Here they can earn more because they're just better. They can produce more in the same time when working at potential, which is why it would be C and not D. So that was just a correction.